Hello, everyone. Welcome to this panel hosted and organized by Horn of Africa TV. My name is Abnet Debesay, and I'm extremely happy that we managed to bring this group of, let's say, East African excellence together to share with us their views on the current situation of the Horn of Africa. And we've specifically selected you because you all have a deep understanding of the situation. You have a big understanding of the mentalities, the cultural aspects. And the most important factor for me was that you all are connected to this region personally and not only professionally, which is the case for most experts that I've heard talking about this topic. So we wanted to make sure to bring people from different regions. So we have Eritrea represented, we have Ethiopia represented. We tried to get someone from Somalia on the show. It didn't work out, but I'm sure the next time we will have someone from the other countries as well. The panel will be focused not specifically on the current events, but mostly on how media is assessing the whole situation, how media is working practically in these regions. And what I want the viewers to take away is that after watching this, I want viewers to have an understanding of what actually happened, what is being said, what are the narratives that are currently distributed, who are the people, organizations, who are responsible for these narratives, and what kind of tools, language, imagery they use to basically confirm these narratives in the minds of the people who consume media. The people in this panel today are all located in the diaspora. Only Dr. Ermias Kebede is currently in Ethiopia. You live there, right? You live in Ethiopia, and you can give us some input from Ethiopia. I will host this panel together with my colleague Marta Tesfa-Mikael, and she is an old friend from Germany, and I met her on an Eritrean event, and we connected immediately because we both have a background in media, and we both shared the opinion that whatever is being reported about the Horn of Africa, let's say 90%, 95% is factual, not correct. And we both had the goal to change that. And I hope that this panel today will help people to understand the whole dynamics of media and reporting and conflict coverage of our region. We have, as I said, Dr. Ermias Kebede. He was born in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and moved to the UK at the age of 6. And he's a consultant in public sector projects within Ethiopia, having permanently returned after 30 years in January 2021. So just shortly ago. And what is your background when it comes to politics and conflict analysis, and how did you get to that? Not everyone does that.
So my background, I guess, in Ethiopian politics goes all the way back to maybe when I was about 10 years old. My family is a very politically active family. So we were very much out there in the streets protesting against the EPRDF regime. I've been involved within the Ethiopian community for quite a long time. I was the chair of the Ethiopian community in Britain and other youth associations as well. So I know quite a lot about the Ethiopian politics and community, having been immersed in it for such a long time.
Perfect. I'm really happy that you made it to be in this round today. The next person in our panel is Rahel Welde-Absabatu, and she is a PhD candidate, a post-colonial feminist, Pan-Africanist, and political scientist at the University of Malmö, and you received your Bachelor of Arts in Public Administration at the University of Asmara, right?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
And then it went on to Master of Science in Global Studies at the University of Lund. How are you involved with the whole political analysis and coverage and the whole context of discussions?
My involvement mostly has to do with the fact that, being an Eritrean national who's also worked a lot back in the day when it's come to international affairs, youth and student participation in peace building, Pan-Africanism, and just basically active youth citizenship. I get myself involved in discussions around these issues, but it really just stems from my passion as an Eritrean and also as a person who wants to see peace and security in the Horn of Africa.
The next person in the panel is Dr. Simon Tesfa Mariam, and he's an Eritrean American medical doctor and writer and organizer living in New York City. You currently are the executive director of the New Africa Institute, a think tank producing research for an Africa of collective peace, prosperity, and progress. How did that switch go from medical doctor to political analysis? How do you combine those?
Yeah, really for a long time before medicine, healthcare, I was involved in community organizing in the Eritrean community, Horn of Africa community, and particularly in Seattle, Washington, diaspora organizing. And then, as we know, there were sanctions and protests and things like that. And so, you're constantly in the fight. Sometimes you have to be pulled in the direction of resistance and resisting these things because, what does your career mean when your country is like just wiped off the map or, destroyed like we saw with like Libya? So to me, everyone has to kind of play their part and defend, national sovereignty. And now it's becoming a larger Horn of Africa, Pan-African kind of thing, tapping into the broader African peoples worldwide. So it's just something that is a passion of mine. And so I try to make sure that I stay true to that in addition to the more, medical side of things. So it's very fulfilling work.
Perfect. Great. Again, thank you all for making the time to be here and sharing your knowledge. I would say we just start with going into the topic. It will be a lot of information. Feel free to stop, rewind, listen again. We will also provide some additional literature from our panelists to you to give you the chance to access some information that might be valuable and might be helpful to understand the whole situation and to also be able to understand how media works in general, especially when it comes to Africa. I'm happy that we will be able to add the post-colonial perspective, especially with you, Rahel. I think that's a very important issue. And I'm also happy that, Marta, you can complement everything with information and examples from other regions where similar tactics have been used. Marta, I haven't introduced you because you are hosting with me. So I will give the mic to you to say some words about yourself as well.
Okay. Thank you. My name is Marta Tessa Michael. I'm Eritrean living in Germany. I was born in Germany. My background is media and economics. And when you all spoke, I thought, this is exactly also my entry into this topic. And more specifically, the media aspect. We all remember 98, when the war broke out. That was, for me, the starting point, really, to dig more into the media coverage. And I remember that I felt so insulted by the media reports. There was, Abi, you might remember that, there was one article in a German newspaper saying two bold men fighting over a comb, referring to President Isaias Afwerki and then Prime Minister, the late Prime Minister Meles Zenawi, and belittling this so-called border conflict into some crazy man, you know, fighting over some land with no, meaning. So for me, that was the moment where I started to distrust more the media. I remember in my household, very political household, my mother and my father always used to comment on the news. Like they never believed anything. And I was kind of rebel to that. I said, oh, you are too harsh on them. But soon as started and I was involved, I realized they are right. So that was my motivation to study media and to dig more into that. So I'm very happy for this Horn of Africa platform where we can connect and share our experience, because I think this is something that was crucially missing. So I'm very happy with that. That's it.
Thank you, Marta. Some words about me. My name is Abnet Debesay. I grew up in Germany. I'm Eritrean, and the story is really similar. It was basically with 98 when the conflict broke out, and we were old enough to understand what's happening. And I think being Eritrean, you grow up slightly political because it's part of your story. You often have to explain why you are in that country, and then you have to explain that your parents are refugees. And with this, with a very young age, you start accessing these topics and understanding these and looking for information. It was the same thing that there was the start of mistrust with media, not in general, but with certain media institutions, especially in Germany, that gave me the motivation to then move on and study post-colonial studies, communication science, and social science. And yeah, I'm really happy that I think with this group, we have quite some background from different subjects and directions to really get to the bottom of what's actually happening and how things are being reported and distributed in the media. All right. So yeah, I think for our viewers, it's important to understand how everything actually happened, what really happened, when it happened, and who the involved parties were. Maybe Ermias, as you are located in Ethiopia at the moment, and for the future, you are probably able to have to give a very detailed account of what happened. And yeah, if others have something to add, please feel free to jump in and add more to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Abnet. So, I mean, this we could go back probably 5 decades to really go to the roots of this, but maybe it's best to start in 2016. 2016, there was a popular uprising. We had the Haile Mariam Desalegn government, which succeeded Meles Zenawi after his passing. That government was not very popular. I mean, I think most people know that Haile Mariam Desalegn was controlled by the TPLF clique. He wasn't really the decision maker and was forced to play what I think we would all term as a puppet government. So there was an uprising within the Oromia region, which was something which was likely going to happen, especially with the Addis Ababa master plan, where they're pushing into Oromia pastoral lands. And then there was also an uprising within the Asmara region. So those two major areas of dissatisfaction came to a boil, which pretty much began the demise of the TPLF-led government. Interestingly, for those of us living in the diaspora in Ethiopia, fighting for change, change actually came from within. And it was from the Oromia People's Democratic Organization with Lemma Magersa and Abiy Ahmed, and then with the Amhara People's Democratic Movement, where you had Demeke Mekonnen and the previous foreign minister as well, who were quite instrumental in navigating against the TPLF. So back then, of course, Ethiopia was controlled by these four parties. You include TPLF, and then you include the Southern Ethiopian People's Democratic Movement. But of course, you know, all of that apparatus was just for show. The real power was with TPLF. They controlled the military, they controlled the political institutions, they controlled pretty much business as well. So the uprising brought about political change in which Dr. Abiy Ahmed came into power. What we do know over this last few years, in his first year, he was pretty much unable to do much. You know, they were watching him, the TPLF, they still controlled the intelligence, they controlled the military. You know, his life was in danger. You know, there's stories of him having to hide out in Demeke Mekonnen, the deputy prime minister's house, the night before they were going to vote for him, because there was a chance that they could assassinate him. Fortunately, he's quite a very clever, you know, he's got a military background, he's a colonel, and was able to overcome these challenges. And he also made political changes and created what is known as the Prosperity Party. And so that reduced the power of the TPLF, and probably was where you can see where the real war kicked off. So probably 2 years ago, the TPLF had seen that as a major threat, and I wouldn't be surprised if you know, they started strategizing at that point. So while we know the war kicking off physically in November the 4th, 2020, you know, I personally believe that they'd started strategizing 2 years ago, and that's why you see a lot of their movements on the media being quite slick, because they've had time to plan for this. So November 4th, the night before that, on November 3rd, the TPLF military organization attacked the Northern Command of Ethiopia. Now, why this is important is the Northern Command is one of the biggest concentration of military power within Ethiopia. And this actually goes back to the 98-2000 war. Because of that war, it gave the TPLF the ruse to move all of the military power into their own region. So by doing that, they pretty much, you know, debilitated the Ethiopian military for at least those first couple of days. And it was an act of treason to attack your own people. And these are the people which have protected and lived amongst those, you know, people, that region for the last decade. And many people lost their lives. It was a shock to the system, to the country. And that is where we see the genesis of the physical war beginning.
Talking about that, let's all make a little brain exercise and just imagine if this happened in Germany, in the US, if the group of military decided to, you know, attack the own people. Thanks, Ermias, for your input when it comes to the Ethiopian side. Can you, Rahel, give us your view with focus on Eritrea, how the whole situation unfolded for Eritrea and Eritreans?
Yes. The Eritrean view is not so different from Irmias's explanation of the situation. But I guess we can say that the tension really started after the new peace agreement, if I can call it that, between Eritrea and Ethiopia was signed between Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed and President Isaias Afwerki in July 2018. Both populations, those in Eritrea, Ethiopia, including a lot of people in the diaspora, were very happy that this peace agreement was signed. This peace deal was able to come into fruition after some 20 years of war, conflict, and then also the no peace, no war situation. A complete diplomatic deadlock between Eritrea and Ethiopia for close to like 20 years. Despite the fact that the people were very positive about this peace deal, there wasn't so much positivity coming out of the northern part of Ethiopia, in Tigray, and particularly among the TPLF and their cadres, because, well, I guess they've been investing quite a lot to make sure that Eritrea and Ethiopia wouldn't be at peace. They had spent decades trying to undermine Eritrean sovereignty, undermine the Eritrean government, and any prospects of development, especially economic development. When it comes to the economic development, we could all, take advantage of with a peaceful Horn of Africa, a peace between Eritrea and Ethiopia. I think about, I would say, give or take, like a year after the peace agreement, that's when the rhetoric became much more loud. I don't know if Irmias understands Tigrinya, but for those of us who do understand Tigrinya, to hear the different things that the TPLF leadership were saying in Tigrinya about not only Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed and the Prosperity Party, but what they were saying about Eritrea and the Eritrean leadership, they were actively mobilizing for war. Yeah, there was I believe it was like the 45th anniversary of the establishment of the Tigray People's Liberation Front, where they had military parades, at, I believe it was the location was in Maqala. And I will never forget the president of Tigray, I guess it's called, the title is the president, right? He had said that Eritrean troops are welcome to come to Tigray. And he said that with the ill intent or the very false assumption that Eritrean troops would defect into Tigray and then join the Tigray militia or whatever military force that they have to then attack Eritrea and overthrow the government. Even though the media waves, the Tigray media waves were positioned to start conflict, to go to war, I don't think that any Eritrean anticipated that they would attack the Northern Command, especially the way that they did. Obviously, it was a catalytic event. It was, it was of course surprising still that they would have the audacity to attack their own military. What was their intentions, even the brutality of it. So from what I understand, they had attacked different depots from within, right? Because they have the, Tigrayan, soldiers, military officials, whatever, that were in the inside. Obviously, they'd be in the inside because, Tigray is part of Ethiopia, but these individuals had attacked their compatriots who were of, I'm assuming, other ethnic groups, right? Besides killing many, they also had forced many to flee into Eritrea, or at least to go northwards. And instead of, attacking these soldiers or, seeing it as some type of ambush, I don't know how they figured that out, but the Eritrean troops, military on the Eritrean side, were able to, clothe and heal, or give medical attention to those who were wounded. Yeah, and so with the by November 4th, the security operation was made official by the Abiy Ahmed's government, and the war persisted. With the Eritrean perspective, if I may kind of double down on this, especially in the language of Tigrinya, at least from the things that I've been able to hear from different recordings or, their different news outlets, is that they have always, they did not accept the peace deal between Abiy Ahmed and President Isaias Afwerki, and they always saw Eritrea as a threat, despite the fact that the Eritrean government had never come out and said anything to the extent that they would, attack Tigray. I mean, technically, of course, that would mean they'll be attacking Ethiopia, and why would Eritrea attack Ethiopia if they just signed a peace deal with them? In fact, right after the peace deal was signed, the borders between Eritrea and Ethiopia were open, and of course, the immediate borders of Eritrea and Ethiopia are Tigray. So we had a lot of Tigaro, coming in, and they were able to do some, economic activities, trade, sell stuff within Eritrea. So yeah, I think the Eritrean perspective is one that definitely recognizes how the TPLF always framed Eritrea as a threat, and in fact, I will go far as to say as their ontological security is dependent on Eritrea either being insecure or being considered a pariah state among the world. Every bad thing that would happen to Eritrea was considered a win for them, and they weren't happy that Eritrea was winning on the side of peace with Ethiopia by the peace deal that was signed in 2018.
Thank you, Rahel, for your presentation on the chronology. I want to talk about the absence of peace in the media, because when the peace deal was signed, I don't recall any mainstream media in the West really saying anything about it, or it was more negative. And I think that this is a very crucial aspect of the media in general, because the media has inherited a very hostile and a very aggressive tone. That's because when we say the military-industrial complex, we cannot say it without including the media in it. So it's a military-industrial media complex. So the media is always also very dependent on war or bad stories. And I think that is there was one, I think it was one Ethiopian who said that the peace deal between Eritrea and Ethiopia was similar to the peoples, like the unification of East and West Germany. And I remember when in '89, when the unification of Germany took place, we were all very happy and it was promoted. So the media didn't promote the peace between Eritrea and Ethiopia. Predates the war now, and now they are very engaged in the war. So yeah, that's just something that is very typical of the media also.
Yeah, and I think especially when it comes to the global South, it is just the main narrative that there's chaos everywhere unless we are there to help those people out. And but you mentioned also that sentiment of seeing the type of brutality being applied against their own people when they attacked the Northern Command. But there was also, yeah, I mean, like the missiles sent to Asmara, and how was the sentiment there? How did you see that situation, and how did you read the situation, and what were you expecting then? Maybe also that's a question to everyone else. I think we all remember what we did that moment when we saw the news, and old fears came up, and I think it's good to know for people what that meant to Eritrea and Eritreans.
Yeah, it was less than 24 hours since a video was released of the spokesperson of the TPLF, Getachew Reda, saying that he was going to do that they were going to send missiles to Asmara and Gondar. Maybe they said Addis Ababa too. I think maybe Addis Ababa was a little bit farther than the range. But yeah, he actually went on, there was like, going viral on the internet, at least among the Eritrean Ethiopian circles, that he said that they were going to send missiles. And yeah, that evening was, of course, scary, a very scary prospect for those of us who have family. And after many tries, I think it might have took me about a half hour to get in contact with my mother, who's living in Asmara at the time. And yeah, she told me that, yeah, they heard some missiles. It was fine. Doesn't seem like anybody was hurt. I have an aunt, or my mother's aunt, my grand aunt. She lives just on the edge of Asmara, and she had one of the missiles dropped not too far from her place. And her being, a nurse, and also, employed at the National Union of Eritrean Women, she went there to make sure that everybody was safe, and it was fine. So, I felt reassured that, okay, like, it's not as bad. It doesn't seem like they've, actually hit any type of major targets or whatever. And so I felt okay. Mind you, I also lived in Eritrea during the 1998-2000 war. And I know what that feels like, to have that threat, or to see those attacks, or to at least to hear warfare. And even though it was a very unfortunate move by the TPLF, I honestly felt assured that the people were just going to be as resilient as they usually been, and that's been the case. Of course, when you're far away and you can't do anything about it, you get very scared. But luckily, it didn't. The attack didn't take any lives. The missile attacks.
All right. Thank you. I would say it would be also good to know what media said about these things, and maybe we can go into the next topic cluster, which is assessing and understanding the narratives that are being distributed at the moment and back then. What would you say was is the biggest narrative that was sent out that brought a lot of attention to the situation of the Horn at the moment? What was the narrative that was sent out and was seen everywhere that made people aware that there is something happening? I would give that question to Simon, maybe, because with your written report about the disinformation in Tigray about this conflict, I think you can provide some in-depth information on how these narratives come up and are being distributed, and who is behind it. So what would you say is the biggest, most powerful one?
Narratives, just like There's so much. There's so much. So are we talking about like this particular, we're talking about the missiles and like that were fired? Are we talking about atrocities that are alleged, or all of it? Like what's 'cause there's so much. There's so much propaganda. The narrative? Is it the narrative? Okay. So we're talking about the narrative. I would say in general, it's a lot of victim and aggressor like flipping. And so what you have is blaming the victim. So we have to recall, as everyone here sort of talked about or suggested, the war was started by TPLF, and not just November 4th, but in the months leading up to it. We also know that they were digging trenches in elementary schools, at churches, religious sites. We know this because Rabi Kori Boulay of the AFP reported it in Bisober, in the town of Bisober. He said that he talked to the locals, and they said that they were angry at TPLF for hiding these instruments of war in their where their children go to school, and where their religious figures pray. So we know that was 6 months in advance. We also know that they started setting up a Tigray liaison friendship office. Rabi Kori Boulay also reported this. And this was ran by Wandimu Asiminu, who basically is a TPLF high-ranking member, former ambassador of Somalia. So again, this to this very day serves as the kind of like a foreign affairs branch of TPLF. Before the war started, knowing that we're going to need some organ that's going to, this de facto kind of organ that's going to communicate to the world. And we saw that this person was communicating regularly and giving talking points to like William Davison and others. And William Davison is the former, he was the head of this press club that they had for the foreign correspondents in Addis. And so what that tells us is that there was a sophisticated plan, media-wise, to convey messages from the ground to the Western world, the broader world, even the Ethiopian people. There's this funny meme that exists that I just love so much. So it's if you guys maybe remember this, there was a meme of like how TPLF speaks 3 different languages. So they speak Tigrinya, and in Tigrinya, it's aggressive. It's like, we're the tough guys. We're going to go. We're going to get this. We're going to do this and that. And they're speaking to their own people. They're speaking across the border to Eritreans, knowing that, significant segment of the population there speaks Tigrinya. So it's a lot of bravado. The second is they speak Amharic, Harinya, to basically the Ethiopian masses, to convey to them that same sort of thing. It's not what they would say to their own people, what they would say to the broader Ethiopian masses. And that's more of that's aggressive when they need to be aggressive. And then always to the international community, what are they? So it's the victim, and they speak in English. And so you'll see them giving their tweets will turn English, their speeches will turn English, or interviews will be English, or the statements that they give to these foreign journalists. So they're like 3-faced in their approach, media-wise, depending on what audience they're speaking to, thinking that there's not going to be anyone who can know 2 languages and understand the difference between the 2. But fortunately, we have multilinguists that exist and who can, expose what's going on. And it's a very, it looks sophisticated on the outside, but sometimes it's just, if you really look at it, it's pretty foolish and very short-sighted and narrow-minded, and they're being exposed for it now. And so the narrative, again, going back to this victim blaming thing, it's in complicity with the international media. As we saw, after the ceasefire, we recall that they had every opportunity to stop this war and, bring peace to the region, and put their guns down and talk about the future of not only Tigray, but Ethiopia and Eritrea and all the countries involved in this conflict. But instead of doing that, what did? They went on the offensive. First off, they killed off all the administrators that were, that were administering while the federal forces were there in reprisal killings. And they killed Eritrean refugees just purely out of revenge and pettiness. What did they accomplish out of that other than just like a blood sacrifice type of thing? Like it's coming from their inner soul or something of TPLF, the hate, the deep genocidal hate that exists within them. And then you have the offensives into Afar and into Amhara regions, and we saw them capture in just bold and reckless fashion Lalibela, and even the world couldn't ignore it. The U.S. had to speak up. They had to speak on the reprisal killings. They had to speak up on the killing of Eritrean refugees against their will. They tried. They probably called them on the phone and you idiots. Can't you just do what we say? But they don't have that capacity because they are so petty and so narrow-minded and not supported by their own population. Actually, yesterday I was just in a talk with Eugene per year of Breakthrough News, and he and Answer Coalition. He brought up a very good point that in the New York Times article with Declan Walsh, where Finbar O'Reilly had taken all these pictures of child soldiers. What was said was there was this line in that article in which they openly admit that it's a little blurb, but they say that TPLF did not have support in their own country or in their own region, excuse me. And it was just like it said it so blasé, like it's just normal or something. But that's a big deal. It's an admission that they're not popular in Tigray, and so the image that they give, the narrative is that we are popular, everyone loves us here, it's the whole nation is mobilized. And that's what William Davis will say, that's what Tronvol, Rene Lafort, or whoever will tell you, all these so-called experts who are really TPLF propagandists. You have a situation in which they have all the propaganda machinery that exists in the Western world at their disposal. They have lobbyists and they forward their narrative. But honestly, the more I look at it, the less sophisticated it looks. It's just pumping money, it's throwing money at a problem. And so that can only last so long. You only have so much money. You only have so many resources. You can only, the old saying, you can fool some of the people some of the time, but you can't fool all the people all the time. And essentially that's what's happening. A lot of Eritreans, Ethiopians, or others who, we knew what TPLF was bad, but it's like so exposed now that it's just like it's become almost comical. To be honest with you, it's not comical because of the fact that people are dying and it's tragic. But sometimes even in tragedy, you just can't help but laugh at how absurd something is and how how could this happen? And so this is the case with TPLF. They've become a walking cartoon. So.
Thank you, Simon. I especially find that that point you made at the beginning with the language very interesting. So basically how they tone down or up their language depending on the audience. And that really falls into what I think when it comes to how media comes into that, when mostly Western medias don't understand the local languages and they're basically dependent on input from outsiders. And let me just quickly show you something that that happened at the beginning of the conflict. Let me show you what happened. So basically there was a story coming out in the Netherlands. Yeah, it was distributed with a private channel. And there's this lady here, Saskia, who is a journalist, and she made her way to Sudan to meet and interview displaced people from the Tigray region. And again, whenever we say this, my heart goes out to all people who are suffering from this conflict. And I think we all know how it is to have relatives or even be involved ourselves or suffer from conflict. So whatever we say is really trying to understand how it happened and who is behind it, and not discrediting the pain that people might go through due to this situation. But it is important that we understand the root causes, and that's been diluted in the media. So what happened is she went there to interview, and what you can see here is me confronting her with the fact that big parts of the interview were just translated entirely differently. Like there were sentences missing. She said something about that, how happy she is that she actually was in the refugee camp, that they have everything that they need. They receive food. And yeah, that's what she said. And the translator said something about stolen jewelry, like the soldiers came at night and on our way and took everything that we had. They took our jewelry and everything. So, of course, Tigrinya speakers in the Netherlands pointed that out and spoke up. And then she actually came back to me and said that, and she justified and said that the whole thing was due to a faulty translation. And in the end, here she also tells us that it was the translator on the ground who used the word soldiers when the person, in fact, never even mentioned this in her interview. So that really shows that these people they receive translations, they don't go the extra mile to verify that. And in fact, after I have pointed this out to her several times, they kept the wrong translation. So that's when I get the impression that this whole thing is not a mistake, but indeed it is an agenda that's being followed. And it would work if there was no Eritreans and Ethiopians that might speak Tigrinya here in this region. And imagine how many reports have been distributed and published in the past that just confirm this image of Africans that are fighting for no reason, and that we need the West to help us on. I just wanted to show you that it comes down to, a lot of this comes down to language, and that makes it so important that we amplify the voices of people who are from African countries and from the region themselves. Because we might be in too deep, we might be not entirely objective, but at least we understand the leverage of our words and know what these words can do.
Let's talk a little bit about, soon after the conflict, there were many refugees from northern Ethiopia going into Sudan. And for those of us who are familiar with how the stuff goes down, we also know that there were a lot of soldiers there, right? A lot of, in fact, a lot of those who committed the atrocities at the Maikadra massacre were seeking refuge in Sudan. I know Ermias can speak to this. Can we talk about how people in the refugee camps, that they basically have infiltrators. They have infiltrators within the refugee camps. And of course, that all these different media channels, right? Even the major ones, they do have infiltrators and actual people that support the TPLF who are, siding with the TPLF and mistranslating these things on purpose.
Amias, do you want to add something to it, or maybe Simon, Marta? Yes.
Yeah, I think the movement, the refugees during the conflict towards Sudan became quite a political thing rather than just a humanitarian thing. So there were obviously a lot of women and children moving, but there was a lot of young, able-bodied men who were moving towards Sudan. And as Rahel has pointed out, some of these were from the Maikadra region and had committed war crimes and had committed genocidal acts against ethnic Amharas and some other ethnic groups within Maikadra. The media and their pure laziness is what I would call it. And it's what we're used to in Africa as a continent, when you have Western media which go there to report about conflicts. The lack of accountability and due diligence that they do when they're reporting on a story within Africa is not comparable to what the standards we expect when they're reporting in Europe or North America. So, you know, there was comical things like you could tell some of the people speaking to the French news outlet or RT or AP and Reuters and all of that were district leaders within Tigray. You know, people were able to show that these were political leaders within Tigray. So the narrative took on a very much political narrative. And so it wasn't just about the translations, but even some Ethiopians who speak Tigrinya. Actually, the Prime Minister speaks Tigrinya. You know, they weren't able to dupe the Ethiopian people or the Eritrean people by language. But those who are lazy, like the journalist that you showed us in that clip, were easily fooled because they didn't want to do their due diligence. So the narrative that came out, and it's very difficult, you know, when we're trying to go against this, you're looking like you're going against refugees. This is the political communication propaganda tactics that the TPLF use. That is just pure evil genius. And they, you know, it's very hard for those of us who know what's going on to be able to push back on this, because we look like we're attacking refugees. But we all know that a lot of these people were political operatives that were put in place there. But as we go through the conflict, this thing actually amplifies. And, you know, even to today, we hear about soldiers, you know, like, you know, the UN said we don't know where all the refugees are. Well, we do. They moved from Sudan to Tigray to attack the Ethiopian army. So the refugee crisis, this was actually used by the media and Western politicians to justify their attacks against the Ethiopian government and the Eritrean government. So this is a very important part of the conflict.
Good point with the lack of accountability and due diligence. And I remember there was a tweet also from you, Rahe, back then, and I think it went also Simon. You posted about that BBC story, like, or that how BBC picked up that one fake story and just basically without checking blurted it out. And by the time it had been corrected, it already had been distributed widely. And you all know how media works, that often it's the first impression that lasts. Rahe, what do you think? How could we, you know, what could we do as people, you know, like, we're not in media, as a tip to other people, what can people do to do something against this, or to react on this? And is it even easy to identify?
Well, for those of us who are like of the region, we definitely have some of the, you know, critical thinking tools. That is not only the critical thinking tools, but also we have more of a context, right, to be able to identify fake news more easy than those who are not of the Horn of Africa. Still, you know, our people do get things mistaken. There is this a misunderstanding that the media, international media, or journalists are objective in the way of doing things. That's never fully the case. And then also when when you have these things that are very highly political, there's a lot of actors, there's a lot of interest in pushing out a particular story over another one, whether it's the truth or not. We could combat it, first of all, just as individuals, by critically looking at all information. Anything that comes out, you'd need to double check it, do a quick Google search, check the sources, and make your assessment there. For the non-Eritrean and non-Ethiopian person in this world, it would be very difficult to be able to do that. I think I don't think they'll be able to trace information the way that we could, because we understand these different languages, and of course our communities are speaking about these things, or writing about it on social media constantly. It will be our responsibility then, right, as people from the Horn who care about peace and security within the region, to expose this misinformation, to contact those who are spreading this misinformation and present them with the truth, and work vigilantly against this type of misinformation. It's a very difficult thing to do. I think if you just don't know where to kind of search for what the true information will be, or like who would be speaking in terms of truth. But otherwise, those of us who know better, we could definitely make sure to continue and or step up our efforts to expose these type of lies and misinformation and disinformation too.
Yeah, I think in total, it's really important for people to understand how media works, what the motives are. That media is not that noble organization hanging there actually really checking politics, but it is. It's corporate structures, and they are dependent on viewers, on clicks, on bringing the message out. It's a lot of money is being generated with media. So having the assumption that they're out there to help people is profoundly wrong, and has shown, especially when it comes to our regions. I think important to understand how these stories progress. So Simon, in your report, you made that exercise where you actually depicted the progression of a certain news story from one station to the other. And it really shows how it's being picked up by different actors, by different organizations. And in the end, it's the truth, So it had a lot of people speaking about it, using each other as sources. Is there something you can explain to us regarding like how to read that table you made of the progression of reports about for example, about the alleged Aksum massacre? So there you really outlined when was it reported once and how it's being picked up. How do you see that, and who is actually involved in this? How many people? Who is in there?
Yeah. So what they do, and if we're going to take the Aksum massacre as an example, they don't have the facts on the ground first. It's not like, oh, there's a fact, let me report it as a journalist on the ground, and then I'll take it back. It doesn't start like that. They actually start with a narrative that's not as a fact. So they say, this happened. And you say, okay, who said that? And the person who's, in the case of the Aksum massacre, it was Mirjam van Ryzen of the EEPA, who is based in, she's this European, this organization or whatever, but it's really just it's meant to shame, really to support TPLF over the years. And this is before the war, but we don't have time to go into all that history. But point is the initial reports came out in December saying that it happened in November. And they said it happened in the church. And then Martin Plaut then reported on his blog. And again, this is not like an actual facts on the ground, like firsthand reporting. This is just reporting, saying what happened, from repeating what the EPA said and then expounding upon it. So then he says that there was a standoff in the church, like the church members were inside of Aksumskan, and they were, they were just doing what the Mariamskan church, and they were just, they had the Ark of the Covenant in their hand. They're battling. It's just this absurd like scenario that you're painting. I'm just trying to imagine. I'm like, this is totally absurd. So then in January, then you have additional, not a report yet. You had academic saying this sort of thing, repeating what Martin Plaut and Mirjam van Rijzen had said in the EPA. And finally, Kara Anna, an AP journalist, says in February, I believe it was February 18th, publishes the first article, which then cites what we would call facts or evidence on the ground by going to certain, witnesses who said such and such. And she cites, what's his name? It doesn't matter. Point is she cites some, for the first time, these sources. And so what happens, you got it flipped around. It's the wrong way. First, you get the facts. Then you get this narrative and the story and what's happening. And then you can then publish reports or whatever it is. So in this late process, Kara Anna reported these, firsthand reporting, but even that was like manufactured facts because people were saying, it was TPLF translators and TPLF members and activists who are giving these actual facts to Kara Anna. In fact, we have Kara Anna soliciting Alula Solomon of a TPLF mouthpiece, Tigray Media House, basically going online and saying, hey, everyone, go give information to Kara Anna. She's going to publish this great report, blah, blah, blah. Like, first of all, that's clearly, conflict of interest and bias right there. And then, so then she reports right after that's when she publishes her report. And then that becomes an Amnesty International report. Just after Vanessa Barha, who is this long-known regime change activist against the Eritrean people and TPLF supporter, wanted sanctions on Eritrea, who now was like head of like the East African division of Amnesty, and then this report comes out, and it was all through phone calls from Sudan, not even actually on the ground. So again, like, you're still just cooking up facts. These are not actual facts on the ground. Like Jamal Contest going to my Kadra and talking to actual residents. That's what you do. That's what real reporters do, real journalists do. Sacrifice yourself. You want to make the big bucks, you want to make your name, go out there and, when bullets are flying, have the courage to go, do that stuff or whatever. That's not what they were doing. That's not what Kara Anna was doing. It's just sitting in Nairobi in the capital, just, enjoying cappuccinos and getting information on the ground, or Sudan, if you're Nima al-Bagr or whoever. These hotel journalists are basically not getting the real facts on the ground. And then it becomes this Amnesty report. And in the Amnesty report, we saw how just totally absurd it was. They whittled down the numbers it started off with 700, from the EPA, 750, then they went downwards. Who's heard of a massacre, alleged massacre, where the numbers go down as opposed to increase, because you start finding more bodies. You say, oh my God, there's this going on. So clearly I shouldn't even say estimate, because it wasn't an estimate, it was just manufacturing. They over manufactured numbers and then came back down because they're like, okay, I think we overdid it here. And so then they eventually arrived at, I don't even know what the final, it was like hundreds, it was like 100 or hundreds or whatever. And they couldn't get their facts straight. It was the Eritreans, it was the Ethiopians. And finally, it never even happened at the church, by the way. They said, oh yeah, no, it didn't actually happen at the church. There was no Ark of the Covenant stand down. It was, bodies that were all over the place, all this stuff. But the funny thing is, okay, well, we know, and the reason why, why they had to change they had to say it wasn't at the church anymore, was because they realized, oh my goodness, November 29th, 30th, we didn't realize that there's an actual there's a holiday where it's undocumented, where it's evidenced on TV, where they go to the church the day of the supposed massacre, where Amnesty said there was this stench of like death in the air and this horrible stuff, and bodies littering all over the streets. And then remember, there's the church, the battle of people all murdered in the church and all this kind of stuff. So where obviously you're going to need these bodies, you're going to need stuff in the church, and you're going to need to reconcile this stuff. So they said that, oh, well, it was on a hill by at the edge of Aksum. And that's where the stand down with the Eritrean soldiers took place and all this kind of stuff. So the story keeps changing. The numbers keep getting revised. You can never find the bodies. And they tell you, oh, the hyenas ate the bodies. So that's why we couldn't get it. And then when they can't use hyenas, they say vultures. And the Mariam Dangalat, so-called massacre, they mentioned that the vultures ate the bodies. And again, this is not to say that people are not dying in war and suffering, but you can't just simply make up stories and expect them to be believed by people without any evidence or facts, and then a history of lying and a history of in contradictions, things that are impossible by science to happen. So this is kind of how it gets done. It just makes its way up, and then finally an Amnesty report, or like an ICG, or a Human Rights Watch report, or whatever, even Ethiopian Human Rights Commission report. These reports become the tools of imperial states like the U.S. in order to say there are quote unquote emerging reports, and this is very common language that they use, and then you saw with the U.S. Embassy recently what they just did. They were name dropping about like, are you going to go against Al Jazeera? Are you going to go against BBC, the New York Times, Washington Post, and even the state-funded Ethiopian Human Rights Commission? You're going to tell me all these people are crazy? First of all, this is gaslighting. You can name drop and say every single most loved, most famous person, Angelina Jolie, George Clooney, I don't care who you cite. Just because of your name, you're not going to be, it's not going to carry weight in terms of logic and truth. We need facts. It's based on the facts and the evidence. And if you don't have facts or evidence, I don't care if Barack Obama visited Tigray himself and said such and such. Like, you need the facts on the ground. So that's basically what they do, is that they take things from a narrative, manufacture the facts on the ground, turn it into high-level reports, and then they use this to say there's emerging reports and we need to take some action against the Eritreans and Ethiopians or whoever's the target. So,
yeah. And I think in this context, the most foolish thing was the actual witness of the Aksum priest. I mean, they went back and then said, okay, no, it was just all a reenactment of what happened. But have you ever seen this in any conflict, that people go to the camera and then reenact without actually mentioning that it is a reenactment? That's factoring the facts and being caught doing that and then saying that. So I saw those videos, you saw those videos. We're going to play in a little context video for you all to see.
My name is Priest Waldemariam. On November 2020, we were in deep prayer at our church, St. Mary of Zion in Aksum. Our prayers had to stop abruptly when we heard screams and gunshots from outside. Then, all the priests decided to go outside and plead with the Eritrean and Amhara forces to stop shooting. For the sake of St. Mary of Zion, we pleaded with them. For the sake of Christ, the Son of God, we pleaded with them. For the sake of the Creator, the Most High God, we pleaded with them, till tears dropped from our eyes. Yet, we could not stop them. They shot us all and said, "Your God is not our God.
I wanted to add something because
Yeah.
what then happens is this fake narrative then finds its way in the media and becomes historical fact. Yeah. You know, when they talk about massacres that have happened in Chena or in Maikadra, they then bring up Aksum to say, look, both sides are doing it. And it's interesting how they've done this, because just yesterday, I've got the article in front of me now. The BBC wrote an article about Ethiopia's New Year, and I thought, finally, they're going to write something positive. And it didn't take me a while to read down and see that they then, you know, this so-called Aksum massacre has become a historical fact for them. And let me just read you what they wrote. They write, during the conflict that has erupted in Ethiopia's northern region of Tigray, soldiers from Eritrea reportedly tried to loot Our Lady Mary of Zion Church in the aftermath of an horrific massacre. A civil servant in the city told the BBC that young people ran to the side to protect the ark. Every man and woman fought them. They fired guns and killed some, but we are happy as we did not fail to protect our treasure. Now, this was a paragraph they put under where they talk about the Ark of Covenant. So they've just stated this as historical fact. They've come out with a civil servant. You know, I don't know whether that is supposed to give the events any credence. But, you know, it just shows you how these narratives, and imagine how long ago that was. And to this day, they're reporting it as historical facts. And it just shows you, it's very disappointing, to be honest. You know, I'm a type of person who grew up in the UK looking at the BBC as pretty much the most not independent, but the most truthful, you know, it's not left or right, it's not political. We see it as supposedly the truth, you know. Funnily enough, my grandfather is a journalist in Ethiopia, has been a journalist since the 60s. I remember visiting in 1999, and he told me, you know, when I said to him, oh, Robert Mugabe, he's not a good person. He said, stop listening to that propaganda machine, the BBC. And I sort of thought, oh, my grandfather's a bit wacky. But I now see it. I see how much organizations like the BBC are very much linked with the political activity and the foreign policies of these states. And so they play towards that narrative. And so I'm not going to say the BBC are fabricating truths, but they're not doing enough to actually find the truth. They're happy going with one side of the narrative. And the fact that they're based in Nairobi, and we all know about certain organizations which feed disinformation there, says a lot about how much we can accept what is coming out of organizations like the BBC or the New York Times and so on.
That's very
Excellent
input. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Ermias. Before I start, excuse me for my poor English.
You're perfect.
No, I'm not. I'm listening to you. You're also smooth in your English. But I try to bring you back because you mentioned that what is reported in the media will one day become historical facts. And I think this is also part of the strategy. And when we see the media as a tool for the empire or imperial forces, it makes sense. It has nothing to do with the Horn of Africa, but it has something to do with the media coverage, especially in war times. For this Horn of Africa program, I conducted an interview with a journalist who covered the Balkan Wars as a journalist from the 80s up to 99, when the NATO illegally bombed Serbia. And he told me that that he was one of the few journalists on the ground that who were truly independent, not taking a side, and his reports were rejected by. He worked for the German public stations, and his reports were rejected. And he remembered that the German ambassador, just to show that there is a political dimension in the media, that the German ambassador invited all the journalists and advised them and told them basically not to report in favor of the Serbs. So they there was an agenda, and up to now, this historical fact, this is a very ongoing debate 20 years later still, that there was a genocide that took place in Yugoslavia, and the Serbs were, you know, the villain, the bad guys. And this is about narrative control, that's what I want to say, because it used what has not been said in the media is that the United States needed this war to have a military base in Kosovo. So, especially in our case, the geopolitical aspects never mentioned those geopolitical dimensions. Why? Because when they do, people start to ask questions. And what we have achieved so far is, just to give us credit, is we brought the geopolitical aspect into this debate. Just, you know, we force them now, we all combine, force them to look at the geopolitical aspects. And that we need to push that more, because when we let them, they hide behind this humanitarian so-called crisis, because this is where they think they have leverage and they're good at. And, you know, humanitarian crisis is always a code word for not say war of aggression, you know, to not say that, they say humanitarian intervention, humanitarian crisis, to hide that that they will never get a UN mandate, or you know, they want to illegally intervene in the country. So I think we are we did a pretty good job so far in educating a lot of people, especially the social media, on our issue. We have to do more, obviously, but we are on a very good path. So I just leave it there. Go back to the forum, and
yeah, that's perfect. I love the fact that you're just like providing some bits of context, which is so important, because this is a thing that is not only happening with us. It is there is a handbook for that. Yeah. There is like a playbook how to do that, and it's a little bit almost not disappointing. I mean, it's good that they do it so foolishly in our region, so it's easy for us to identify. But there have been, you know, there have been historic facts being written about how Iraq started, how the whole situation unfolded in Afghanistan. I mean, there's history being written, and I've always asked myself, how is this possible? Because when I try to get information, I make sure to read a lot, to just pick a topic and then read everything around it. But what they managed here, and this is what you also show, Simon, and you, Marta, is that they have enough people from different levels and organizations to kind of confirm what the other person said, There's a term for it. It's called citation forms, and there's an index for it as well. So when someone publishes something, you can see, okay, how much is he citing or she citing themselves, which is usually an indicator for. Of course, if you are the only person dealing with this one question, then of course you have to sometimes cite yourself. But what they do is basically having a lot of organizations. I'm going to talk Sahan, Crisis Group, EEPR, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, USAID, and then you have all these personas from media or former media, personas like Martin Plaut, who's been very active in the communication and construction of facts, I have to say, about the region. And he has been caught several times fabricating and distributing fake news. But then I asked myself, how is this possible that this person is still being invited to major news stations? I mean, he has been caught lying again and again and again, and it doesn't even correct these things. So there is basically no interest of putting things straight or to make sure it's being hidden. That's my assumption of that thing. And I've also have a picture here from the Cairo Center of African Studies, where William posted and said, I have withdrawn from this panel. It was a panel that discussed Ethiopia's Tigray crisis with a distinguished panel consisting of William Davison, a gentleman called Rashid Abdi, and another gentleman called Kjetil Tronvoll. Ermias, I've seen you nodding. You are familiar with these faces. How do you read whatever is being published and produced by these people?
Well, to be honest, gentlemen is a kind word to use for these maligned people whose only perspective is to push a specific narrative. And it's, one of the most disappointing things that I've seen in this conflict is the fact that European journalists or white male, mainly journalists or political commentators have pushed themselves forward, got a lot of airtime and quotations within the Western media, talking about a region and a country which they've maybe spent a few months in, enjoying their times in the cafes of Addis Ababa, while, the people who are living this, here we have 5 people of Ethiopian and Eritrean descent. How many of those kind of people have we heard being interviewed or speaking about the conflict? So this has really opened our eyes. Some of you have had your eyes opened much longer than some of us, but it's really opened us to, the media, the humanitarian industry, as I like to call it, and also the foreign entities which involve themselves within the Horn of Africa, and how it's very skewed towards a certain group of people. William Davidson got kicked out of Ethiopia, which, I really, I admire the Abiy administration, because when they see people like this, some administrations would be fearful to do anything against them. But they've been kicking out these people which they know are behaving not with any ounce of integrity. And to be honest, there are some European, North American white people who speak on our behalf and our narrative, but I still, to be honest, would rather have our own people speak about us. I'd rather have our people on social media following though, you know, your own people. You know, you're doing your likes and your retweets for your white people because, you know, today they're on our side. Next year, we don't know what side they're going to be on because they're not living the lives. You know, if something happens to Ethiopia or something happens to Eritrea, it's our families, it's our people, it's our history, it's our future, which is at on the helm. You know, it's not them. You know, tomorrow, you know, they'll be in Canada or America, and they'll find another country to fetishize about in West Africa or South Africa or whatever.
Can I don't know if, I think Simon would agree with me. He can correct me if he doesn't agree with me. But for Ethiopians to see the likes of Martin Plaut and Sheto Tronvol, you know, for what they are now has been a very, it's been relieving, right? It's been this huge relief because, you know, we've had to deal with them for a couple of decades now. You know, they've been highly invested in the TPLF and spreading their propaganda. And, you know, because the TPLF has lost power and its leadership is no longer, I mean, some of them are arrested, some of them are no longer alive. They're buckling down on their efforts to make sure that the TPLF, you know, survives the unsurvivable. And now that the Ethiopian population, both inside the country and the diaspora, can see these type of actors for what they are, it's very relieving. And it goes to show how much our solidarity between ourselves, right, as concerned Eritreans and Ethiopians, how our solidarity is very important here, and that together we can fight these propagandists.
So I think we are reaching to the end. I really would want to talk about, just give people a little bit of like, let's say, a handbook of what they can do. We've went in there before a little bit. You say you gave tips about how can people can read from different angles to assess a situation. And I think it would be good to know for people what you read, you know, specific pages, certain books, authors, people that you follow, and that their view matters to you. And it would be great if it would be people from our region, or at least African. I don't know if you have people from the top of your head.
I really want to say something about that.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I've kind of like hinted at it, because I see certain accounts that pop up, like that never had a voice, that never said anything about Eritrea, Ethiopia, Somalia for, you know, for as long as we know. Then all of a sudden, you know, they're just starting to be a voice. Some of them are anonymous accounts. Some of them are like real people. But like these Johnny come latelys that I like to call them, they're here. And the thing is, we have to understand that we may be the victims of influence operations and intelligence agencies. They may be from countries in the neighboring region that may have like, you know, see what's going on and try to stir up some issues or to distract. If an issue happens, if a person is making a thread that is like, you know, about some issue, you know, and it goes into the details, you may get caught up in all the minutia and all the stuff and miss the most important points that need to be made, the salient points that people need to know, and direct mobilization and movement building and all this kind of stuff that is like homegrown. And so that is something we have to be very, very careful for. Because I remember there was something with like this GP editor person or whatever, Geopolitical Press, and they were talking about like Basama, blah, 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 or something. And then there were like a CF2 something, C or whatever. And it became this thing where every single person around me is like citing this thing. I'm like, why are you all citing this thing? This person literally said nothing. All they did was just masquerade them, pretend like they're an anti-imperialist. And, you know, you got this like, you know, they seem pro-Ethiopia, pro-Horn of Africa, pro-Eritrea, whatever. That's the thing is that what they did is they took low-hanging fruit. they said, okay, we know that people are very much they're like against the system at the current moment. Let's put out some against the system type rhetoric, and let's add a little details to something they're not as familiar with. So you'll make it appear as though their eyes are being open to something new. And they were like mentioning Xi Jinping and all this kind of stuff. And to be honest with you, I think I'm not going to mention certain countries in the region, but let's just say they from countries where people get kidnapped. Let's just say the intelligence operations are very strong, and you have to be very careful. And honestly, they're not very sophisticated, because I quickly see through it. I talk about it with comrades and friends and colleagues, and then and we kind of see something coming up ahead, and sure enough, those things happen. So we have to not get attached to someone just because they're a Westerner who's talking about go Ethiopians, go Horn of Africa, or Eritreans, or whatever. You can't get caught up in that. There has to be like people putting in their homework, sweating, putting in time and all that stuff, and mobilizing people, and then that's how that is your comrade. Comrade is a very specific term. It means is someone who is in common struggle with you, who faces the consequences. Like right now, if TPLF emerges, we're all doomed, all of us, and we'll face it, we'll feel it. Others won't. They won't feel it. They'll just, maybe it'll be a sad story in a newspaper or something, but they won't feel it. So what I'm saying is we should be the masters of our own destiny. Know your excellency to these peoples, no kowtowing or prostrating or whatever, all these things that so that what we need to do is just building on what Ermias said, is to focus on our own internal facilities and resources and peoples, and so I think we'll be fine.
Oh, perfect. It's actually a mic drop moment, but we still have something to talk about. Do you have some tips for viewers who have not in-depth information yet to understand the situation in the Horn of Africa, like context, historical books, or websites, or even people online that you follow, that you like, or whose analysis you prefer from the African academics? Other than that, I wanted to ask you all if you could share some strategies for viewers to really be on the safe side when communicating in social media. I mean, this whole retweet thing happens quickly. That's how narratives are being or are exploding all over the net. So what can we recommend to our viewers and our people when it comes to mindfulness and accuracy when posting, sharing, and resharing?
We're talking about me. I would say,
Anyone?
I'm sorry. I'm just gonna say, for me, it's just I can't give any one particular name, because then I feel like I'm picking this person, that person. It's so hard. You know what I mean? So I can't give but I will say Horn of Africa TV. You know what I mean? They keep up the great work. So
yeah, great. All right, Rahel, I think you have some, or at least some tips that you can give.
Well, I've often been asked, which media channel is true? Like, which one do you depend on? And I tell them, when it comes to these international media channels, I don't depend on anyone. I might be more inclined to look at the Al Jazeera English website, because they just tend to report more on international events. But I tell people, just read everything, right? Read from all sources, and then use your critical thinking skills to assess what you are reading. Even in the case that it's hard this is for people that are just foreign from they don't understand the Horn of Africa. If that is not really comprehensible for you, just take into consideration all the other times that the media has, played the wrong role in history, right? For instance, yesterday was the 20th anniversary of 9/11. You know, the propaganda around there being weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, for instance. We know that there wasn't, you know, and the effects of that was very detrimental to the people of Iraq, an example. Or, I mean, there's really so many of them, right? But we know that the media can be manipulative like this. And having that in mind, we should also look critically at how the media reports in the Horn of Africa. I do have a book I would suggest. It's been very long since I've read it. Not the most academic book, I guess. I mean, in terms of what I'm reading today, but the book Manufactured Consent, it was written by Edward Herman and Noam Chomsky. I think that's a very good place to start. Also, when it comes to, you know, different documentaries on, you know, the role of social media and how, you know, the algorithms have, you know, been manipulated and tweaked to, you know, get voters to vote a certain way. And I think these type of things are very helpful for somebody to have just like, you know, a basic kind of foundation or understanding of how information is power. And those who spread the information know that it's power, and they will use that power to spread disinformation.
Can I also say, if we're gonna, just real quick, because you mentioned manufacturing consent, I wanted to add Inventing Reality by Michael Parenti, who wrote that book actually prior to Manufacturing Consent. And then, but Manufacturing Consent became like the more popular book afterward. And the thing I like about Parenti is that Parenti is really truly the people's champ. You know, really, you know, grounded in the struggle, organizing in the community, and won't push the, I like that. I like his politics, is what I'm going to say. So it's, I would highly recommend Michael Parenti in addition to Manufacturing Consent, both great books. Inventing Reality.
I just noted it down. Perfect. Yeah, here Manufacturing Consent was on the top list also of my list. Also, there is, I mean, there's a lot of literature about conflict coverage, propaganda, journalism. There's one that I really like. The name is Conflict Coverage and Conflict Escalation, which really talks about the role of journalists when it comes to actually forming the root of a conflict by amplifying certain voices. And it's really, really interesting. Then I think one of the oldest books on the list is Edward Bernays, Public Relations, and that really talks about the psychological mechanisms and language, and how language is being used to manipulate and create certain frames. Then there is another book, The CNN Effect, by Pierce Robinson, and it just talks about the myths of news and foreign policy and intervention. So it kind of brings it all together. And what I really liked is an article as well, written by Alan McLeod, I don't know how to pronounce it. And it was about humanitarian imperialism. And this is basically what we're seeing right now, using, you know, when we take that in contrast to the neocon strategies of, let's say, the 90s and 10s, where it was about, you know, like the oil and the safety and war against terror and all that. And now it's been shifting to, to creating a humanitarian crisis that makes especially liberals feel compelled to speak up against something. So especially pictures of women and children that and bringing basically democracy to these people is basically what we've seen has failed in Afghanistan just the last months. So I think we've made it. I'm really, really thankful that, yeah, you made the time.